Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to be honest with you right out of the gate here. I spent the last 3 days reading through this week's source material, and I feel like I need to just sit in a dark room for a while.
Yeah, that is probably the only appropriate reaction to this kind of material.
Right. I mean, we tackle a lot of complex topics on this show. Usually it's tech trends or history, maybe some business strategy. But today,
Today is a completely different beast.
it really is. We are wading into waters that are, well, they're heavy. They are mind-bending. And frankly, they're a little bit terrifying.
Absolutely. Because it's not often we get a stack of essays that tries to integrate ancient theology, cutting-edge surveillance technology, geopolitics, and metaphysics into like a single unified theory of reality.
Exactly. So what we are looking at is a collection of essays and articles by an author known as M.S.R, published on a platform called the Axis of Truth. And I want to set the stage properly for you here because this isn't just standard political commentary.
Right, it's not a standard social critique.
No, the author is presenting a full cosmology,
A very radical cosmology.
a radical spiritual and geopolitical cosmology.
Yeah.
And the central hook, the thing that grabbed me immediately when I started reading, is this question. What if the world hasn't just gone crazy?
You know that feeling we all have.
Yeah, that feeling that everything is accelerating, everything is chaotic, and just nothing makes sense anymore. MSR asks, what if that chaos is actually a script? What if the conflicts you see on the news and even the opposition to those conflicts are part of a single mechanism?
And that mechanism, according to the text, has a very specific purpose: energy harvesting.
Right. Which, I mean, that sounds like sci-fi, it sounds like The Matrix. But as we get into the text, the author grounds this in some very old, very specific theological concepts.
He really does.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack this theory of what the author calls the Dajjal System. We're going to figure out what an egregore is and why the author thinks it is literally eating your attention.
We're also going to look at the Noahide Project.
Yes, which was a completely new term for me. And finally, we're going to talk about the solution, which M.S.R calls peeling the onion.
But before we jump in, we need to be very, very clear about the lens we are using today. We are exploring this as observers.
Right.
M.S.R writes from a specific perspective. He calls it a Quranic lens, but he's very careful to distinguish this from mainstream institutional religion.
Yeah, that's a key distinction right there. He actually critiques religious institutions pretty heavily, doesn't he?
He does. He views fossilized institutional religion, the flags, the hierarchies, the empty rituals as part of the trap itself. He's offering a mystical, almost Gnostic interpretation of these scriptures to analyze global power.
So, quick disclaimer for everyone listening. We are not here to endorse these views. We aren't here to take sides in any political debate. We are strictly here to objectively break down the argument this author is making about what he calls the age of deception.
Exactly. Let's just look at the mechanics of his argument.
Okay, let's start at the bedrock, the cosmology itself. The author keeps coming back to this core metaphor of fire versus clay. Now, for anyone who went to Sunday school or grew up in an Abrahamic faith, that sounds familiar.
Very familiar.
But M.S.R isn't just retelling a Bible or Quran story. He's using this to explain modern civilization. Help us bridge that gap.
It's the root of his entire theory. To understand M.S.R's view of the internet or the economy or war, you have to understand this specific duality. He goes back to the creation narrative of Iblis, or Lucifer.
Okay.
The ancient story is that there are beings of smokeless fire, the jinn, and beings of clay, which are humans.
Fire and clay. Okay, I'm with you.
Think about the physical properties of those elements. Clay is heavy, it's cool, it's malleable, it holds water, it's grounded, it's slow. To build something with clay takes a lot of time. To grow food in clay takes patience.
It's biological. It's messy.
Exactly. Now contrast that with fire, specifically smokeless fire. It is pure energy. It's speed. It consumes whatever it touches. It has no mass. It creates light, sure, but it burns. The author argues that modern civilization, what he calls the system of inversion, is essentially an ancient rebellion of fire claiming superiority over clay.
So when we look at our world today, high-frequency trading algorithms, fiber optic cables transferring data at the speed of light, AI generating art. In 2 seconds, the author is saying this is a fire-based existence.
Precisely. It's the triumph of the intellect, which is fiery, quick, and proud over the soul, which is clay-like, humble, and deep.
Wow.
He talks about the throne of inversion. It's this idea that we have built a world that mimics light but actually drains the soul. It prioritizes speed over depth. It prioritizes the artificial over the natural.
That is a really haunting way to look at a smartphone. You're holding a piece of smokeless fire in your hand. It gives you the illusion of connection, the illusion of infinite knowledge, but it burns up your actual time. It burns up your attention.
And it leaves you completely hollow. That is a key phrase in the text. Dazzling surfaces and hollow cores. And this brings us right to the concept of the Dajjal system.
Now, usually when people hear Dajjal or Antichrist, they think of a literal person, a guy with one eye, maybe a charismatic political leader. But M.S.R says, no, you have to look bigger.
Much bigger. The text emphasizes that while there may be a figurehead eventually, Dajjal is primarily a global operating system. It's a civilization.
An operating system.
Right. The word Dajjal itself implies deception, covering truth with falsehood. The goal of this system isn't necessarily to blow up the world with nukes. It's to make falsehood appear fair.
Make falsehood appear fair. That is interesting. So it's not about evil looking evil. It's about evil looking like, I don't know, progress.
Exactly. It wants to create a world where divine law or natural law is replaced by code, by bureaucracy. The system offers a false law. It moves us away from living guidance, like listening to your own conscience, toward a bureaucracy made divine.
Right. The text mentions this idea that we have global ethics now. Tolerance, inclusivity, safety. On paper, these sound like inherently good things. Why does the author call them false law?
Because they are external and they are imposed. The author argues that this single global moral code actually removes genuine moral choice. It measures your virtue by how well you comply with the system, not by the actual state of your soul.
I see.
It's the difference between doing what is right because you deeply feel the truth of it in your heart versus doing what is quote-unquote right because you don't want to get canceled on social media or fired by human resources.
One is consciousness and the other is just compliance.
And that is the ultimate mechanism of control. The author calls it manufactured consent. If you have to force people to serve you with a whip, your control is actually quite weak. But if you can make servitude look like convenience,
Oh, man.
if you can make slavery look like safety or connectivity, then you have true control.
And that leads us to the metaphysical engine of this whole system. This was the part of the essays that really felt like a sci-fi movie to me. The author calls the world a theater of lies. And he introduces this concept of egregores. Now, I have heard this term in occult circles before, but M.S.R is using it in a very specific, almost mechanical way.
It is entirely mechanical in his view. It is the core mechanics of the energy harvesting we mentioned in the intro.
So, for the listener, what exactly is an egregore?
An egregore is a collective thought form. Imagine a psychic entity that doesn't exist on its own. It is born from the shared energy, focus, and emotion of a massive group of people.
Right.
It's created by fear, rage, identity, and desire. And once it's created, the text argues, it literally feeds on human attention to sustain itself.
So it's a battery.
It's a parasite.
Yeah.
And it needs a host. The host is the crowd.
Okay, let's make this concrete. If I am scrolling through X or whatever social media and I see something that makes me absolutely furious, some injustice, some political stupidity, and I start typing a reply and my heart is racing, my blood pressure is up, am I feeding an egregore?
Yes. That visceral reaction, that literal heat in your chest, that is the food. And here's where the author drops the hammer. He argues that the system controls both sides of every single conflict to maximize this harvesting.
Both sides.
Think about it from an engineering perspective. If you want to generate the maximum amount of electricity, you need a positive and a negative terminal. You need tension. M.S.R uses the example of the current conflict in the Middle East.
Right, and he treads on very controversial ground here.
He does. He describes a genocide egregore and a Zionism egregore.
Break those down for us based on the text.
On one side, you have millions of people filled with outrage, despair, and grief over the immense suffering in Gaza, completely valid human emotions. On the other side, you have existential fear, historical trauma, entitlement, and grievance. Also, incredibly high-intensity emotions. Both sides are pouring massive amounts of their life energy into the theater.
But wait, that creates a real moral paradox for the listener.
Yeah.
Because most people would say, well, one side is factually right and one side is wrong. Is the author saying we shouldn't care about a genocide?
This is definitely the hardest part of the theory to swallow. He isn't saying the events aren't real. He isn't saying they aren't horrific. He is saying that your reaction, your participation in the digital outrage machine does not actually stop the bomb. It feeds the exact system that drops the bomb.
Wow. So the system eats the submission of the people who comply, but it also eats the rage of the people who resist.
Exactly. The text mentions the COVID-19 era as another prime example of this. You had the compliers who gave the system the energy of submission. But the system also desperately needed the skeptics. It needed their volatile fury. It needed their obsession. Both groups were completely locked in the theater, staring at the stage, pouring their life force into the script.
This really challenges the modern idea of activism. We always think, if I am loud enough, if I post enough, I'm fighting the power. But M.S.R says,
He says, if you know their name, they are part of the game.
that is a brutally cynical quote.
It's the concept of controlled opposition. The argument is that the media and the broader system define the Overton window, the acceptable boundaries of debate. You can be a rebel, sure, but you have to be a specific type of rebel.
You have to rebel in a way that the system approves of.
Yes, in a way that reinforces the binary. If your dissent actually threatened the core frequency of the system, if it threatened the energy harvest itself, you wouldn't be on the screen. You would be invisible or dead.
So if you are a famous dissident with millions of followers, you have basically been cast in a role. You are the heel in the pro wrestling match.
And the audience pays to see the heel get beaten, or they cheer for the heel to win. Either way, they buy the ticket, they are feeding the egregore.
So who exactly are the people watching this play? Because the author breaks humanity down into 4 types of consciousness here. I think this is really helpful for listeners to try and place themselves in this framework.
It's a typology of the spark. Remember, the clay has a divine spark inside it, the fire does not.
Okay. Group 1, the ordinary human.
These are the vast majority. The text describes them as kind, sincere, but spiritually asleep. They live by habit. They trust the institutions. They aren't bad people at all. They just want to grill on the weekends, raise their kids, and pay their mortgage. They seek comfort and they fear loss. They are fully plugged into the theater because it feels safe.
Then we have group 2, the spark-aware.
These are the people who feel a stirring, a deep uneasiness. They look at the world, at the ordinary human life, and they say, something is very wrong here. They see the glitches in the matrix. They feel the artificiality of the fire world. They are the ones who suffer the most, usually, because they see what others cannot, but they don't know what to do about it.
And group 3, the fallen spark.
Yet this is the tragic category. These are people who did wake up, they've realized the system was a complete lie, but then they were seduced, maybe by cynicism, maybe by power, or maybe, and this is very common, they got sucked into an ideology that promised to fight the system but was just another trap.
Right.
They became the radical who is just feeding a different egregore. They trade their immense potential for a speaking role in the play.
And finally, the scary one, group 4, the sparkless.
The cold fire. The author describes these as beings who lack the inner light entirely. They often run the major institutions. They are the high-level bureaucrats, the titans of industry, the leaders who can make decisions that destroy millions of lives without losing a single minute of sleep.
The NPC meme comes to mind, but this feels much darker.
It is significantly darker. The author connects this back to Iblis. The goal of that ancient rebellion wasn't to wipe humans out physically. It was to hollow out the inner world. If Iblis can make us live like we are just biological machines consuming, excreting, fighting, dying, then he proves his original point. He proves that clay is worthless. He proves that we don't really have a spark.
That perfectly sets the stage for the geopolitical part of this deep dive. Because M.S.R doesn't just leave this in the clouds of theology. He lands it right in the middle of the most contentious geopolitical issue on the planet right now. We need to talk about Zionism and the Noahide Project.
And we have to be very careful and precise here. We are reporting exactly how the source text defines these terms. M.S.R is not using the mainstream political definitions.
Right. The source defines Zionism as a symbol and a system, not an ethnicity.
He is emphatic about that. Zionism, in this specific textual context, is not a people or a creed. It is the worldly face of the rebellion. He calls it an ideology of control dressed in divine vocabulary. He argues it's the physical political manifestation of that Dajjalic system we talked about earlier. It uses the claim of God to enforce a system of absolute material dominance.
So it's hijacking religious language for earthly power.
Yeah.
And he certainly doesn't spare the Muslim world in this critique either.
No, he shreds the leadership of the Muslim world. He talks about patsy states. He argues that the global system categorizes Muslim-majority nations into two buckets. You have rogue states, those are the ones actively resisting dominance, and then you have compliant managers, countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt.
And the role of those compliant managers isn't to actually lead their people, but to pacify them.
Exactly, to keep the population quiet while the global system advances. The text says their primary job is to manage the anger of the street so it never actually threatens the core structure.
And what exactly is that structure advancing toward? This is where we get to the Noahide Project. Now, I'll be completely honest, when I have heard of Noahide laws in the past, it's usually framed as these basic, universal ethical laws. Don't kill, don't steal, don't eat a limb from a living animal. Sounds pretty good. Who could possibly object to that?
That is the dazzling surface. Universal ethics. But M.S.R. argues we need to look at the jurisdictional claim, not just the ethical one. His major critique is that the Noahide laws act as a mechanism for global jurisdiction without global consent.
Jurisdiction without consent. Unpack that for us.
In a secular democracy, laws derive, at least in theory, from the consent of the governed. We vote, we agree to the social contract. The Noahide framework, as described in these sources, is a theocratic legal system rooted in a very specific interpretation of Talmudic jurisprudence. It categorizes all of humanity into two distinct groups: Jews, who are under the Mosaic covenant, and Gentiles, who are under the Noahide covenant.
And the issue the author raises is that the interpretation of those laws for everyone else lies with a specific clerical elite.
Exactly. The text emphasizes that legal definitions matter immensely. For example, one of the 7 laws is a prohibition against idolatry or blasphemy. In a secular court in the West, blasphemy isn't a crime. But under a Noahide court, which the author argues is the ultimate goal of groups like Chabad to normalize globally, who gets to define what idolatry is?
Right, if you're a Christian believing in the Trinity, or a Hindu with multiple deities.
You could technically be in violation of this supposedly universal law, depending entirely on how strict the rabbinical interpretation is. The author points out that this is about creating a false law, a bureaucracy made divine. It is a legal trap where you are subjected to a hierarchy you never voted for and you can't opt out of because it claims supreme divine authority over the entire planet.
So it is essentially a theocracy that applies to everyone, whether they signed up for it or not.
Yes. And the text specifically names Chabad Lubavitch not just as a religious movement, but as an institutional driver of this. It points to their elite access. They have meetings with heads of state, top military leaders, presidents. The argument is that they are using this access to normalize this legal theology. They're preparing the legal framework for a messianic governance.
This leads directly to the concept of the Third Temple. In this cosmology, the temple is not just a building, is it?
No, not at all. It is a legal threshold. The source argues that the construction of the Third Temple signals the official beginning of this new world order, and the false Messiah, or the Dajjal, is expected to be the sovereign of this new legal order.
Not a spiritual teacher offering enlightenment. A king.
A judge king.
Yeah.
Someone who enforces this law globally through human courts. The text aligns this perfectly with the Islamic concept of the Dajjalic order, or the Christian concept of the Antichrist. And frankly, the text is very, very dark about the current violence we see in the region today. It argues that the displacement and bombing is essentially pre-construction.
Pre-construction. Like clearing the site for a building project.
Clearing the space for a system that cannot tolerate competing truths, it is a chilling interpretation. The text literally says the land is being cleansed in real time to make way for this new legal reality.
It really feels like the jaws of a trap closing. And the other jaw of that trap is technology. Section 5 of the reading covers surveillance and biological governance.
This is where the fire element really takes over our daily lives. The source discusses the architecture of surveillance. It heavily mentions tools like Pegasus.
Pegasus is that military-grade spyware developed in Israel, right? The zero-click stuff.
Correct. Zero-click means it penetrates your device without you doing a single thing. You don't have to be tricked into clicking a phishing link. They just own your phone. They can turn on the microphone, the camera, read your encrypted messages. The author uses this to argue that privacy is completely dead. But he goes much further than just hacking. He talks about the VPN illusion.
This one really hit home for me, because everyone uses VPNs thinking they are safe. I'm in an encrypted tunnel. Nobody can see what I'm browsing.
The source claims that many major commercial VPNs are actually Israeli-owned or routed heavily through Allied intelligence infrastructure. So users have a completely false sense of privacy. You think you are hiding in a secure tunnel, but the tunnel has glass walls for the people actually running the system.
And why do they want all this data? Is it just surveillance capitalism trying to sell us more shoes? Or is it political?
It is data harvesting for behavioral profiling. They want to predict dissent. If they know your psychological profile better than you know yourself, they can neutralize you before you even decide to rebel. But the even deeper layer the author gets into is biological governance.
This ties back to the COVID era again.
Yes, the text reflects on how the human body itself was redefined during the health crisis as a site of collective governance. Your personal health status became a public license to participate in society. But beyond vaccines and mandates, M.S.R talks about frequency saturation.
The electromagnetic noise all around us.
We're practically swimming in it. Wi-Fi, 5G, glowing screens everywhere. The argument is that this invisible environment keeps the human nervous system in a state of chronic low-level anxiety. And if you are chronically anxious, your brain is in survival mode. You cannot think deeply. You cannot connect to the spark.
You literally become a zombie.
Exactly. The technology conditions the sparkless state. It's not an accidental byproduct of modern life. It is architectural. It disrupts the human frequency so that we are far more susceptible to the egregores. If you are stressed, tired, and overstimulated by screens, it is much, much easier to make you angry or afraid.
So let's just recap the situation according to M.S.R. before we get to the solution. We have a world run by a theater of lies, which is fueled by our own emotional energy. We have a geopolitical false law closing in via the Noahide project. And we have a technological cage that monitors our thoughts and physically disrupts our biology. It sounds completely hopeless.
The author acknowledges that feeling. He states it very plainly. No movement will save us.
No movement.
Right. Mass awakening is a myth. That is a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. We always hear activists say, when the people finally wake up, the system will crumble.
Yeah, that's the whole premise of political action.
M.S.R says the majority will actually prefer familiar suffering. They won't wake up. They are comfortable in their seats in the theater. So the solution is not collective. It is highly individual.
This brings us to the final section, the solution. Peeling the onion. The author gives us 6 distinct layers to leave the theater. And I want to walk through these carefully with you because this is really the only practical advice in the entire stack of essays.
Right. And notice that it is a subtraction process, not an addition process.
Okay, layer 1 is awareness.
This is the initial cognitive shift. You have to admit you are inside a construct. You have to admit that your fiercely held original thoughts might just be scripts you were fed by the algorithm. It completely destroys the ego's illusion of being an independent free thinker. You have to be humble enough to look in the mirror and say, I have been fooled.
The layer 2 is attention. We talked a bit about this.
This is about ruthlessly withdrawing your energy. Stop doom scrolling. And this is the truly hard part. Stop feeding the egregores, even with your hate. If you are angrily typing a furious comment at someone who disagrees with you, you are actively feeding the beast. By stopping, you aren't ignoring injustice, you are refusing to be harvested.
Layer 3 is consumption.
This is all about filtering. Food, yes. Eating clean, natural food, which is clay, rather than highly processed industrial food, which is fire. But it's also about information. The daily question to ask yourself is, does this podcast, does this news article, does this show nourish my spark, or does it numb it? If watching that political debate makes you feel empty or irrationally angry, turn it off. Stop consuming it.
Layer 4 is practice.
And he clearly distinguishes this from empty ritual. He means deliberate, chosen acts of connection to the One. Silence, honest, quiet prayer, standing barefoot on the earth. He contrasts this deeply with religious performance, doing things just so others see you are a good believer.
Layer 5 is identity. Now this one feels the most difficult in 2026. Everyone is so attached to their labels.
It is about loosening the death grip on those labels. M.S.R says you have to be willing to stand entirely alone. He argues that most of us wear our political or religious identities exactly like sports team jerseys. I am a conservative, I am progressive, even I am a Muslim or a Christian, but purely in the tribal sense.
Right, in the sense of, I hate the other team and my team is always right.
Exactly. He says as long as you need the crowd to tell you you are essentially a sleeper agent for the system. The system can activate you at any moment just by threatening your team. To actually wake up, you have to find that clay inside you, that divine spark that existed before any societal label was slapped onto you.
And a final layer, layer 6, discernment.
This is advanced, sensing which freedom movements are just new costumes for the exact same illusion. It's about developing that deep gut instinct, that spiritual instinct that tells you when you are being played, even by the quote-unquote good guys who claim to be fighting the system.
And all of this culminates in his concept of tawhid. Now, usually in standard Islamic theology, that translates simply as monotheism, but the author puts a very specific spin on it.
He redefines it as absolute inner alignment. He writes, God does not create religions. God sends guidance. He views fossilized religion, the massive institutions, the political flags, the megachurches, as just another wing of the theater. True Tawhid is refusing to place any human system, whether it's the state, the church, or the algorithm, on the same axis of authority as the creator.
The ultimate test, according to the source, comes down to a choice. Are you aligned with remembrance or with reflex?
That is the crux of his entire thesis. When the pressure comes and he forcefully argues the pressure will come, will you react out of programmed reflex? Fear, compliance, outrage? Or will you act out of a deep remembrance of who you really are?
It's a profound challenge. It basically says the only way to win the game is to literally stop playing.
Precisely. To step off the stage entirely, to become bad batteries that the system simply cannot drain anymore.
The author leaves us with this provocative thought at the very end. The unmasking of this system won't come with thunder and lightning. It comes with recognition.
It's that quiet moment. You look at the screen, you look at the shouting politician, you look at the manufactured outrage, and you simply see it for what it is, a script. You don't get mad anymore. You just see the strings attached to the puppets.
And the ultimate challenge to you listening right now is this. If the system feeds on your attention and your outrage, what happens if you simply stop watching the play?
The age of deception dies the moment a single soul refuses to serve it.
That is a very powerful place to leave it. This has been a lot of heavy material to process. I think I'm going to go turn off my phone and just walk in the woods for a bit.
That sounds like a perfect clay activity.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
It was my pleasure.
And to you listening out there, good luck peeling the onion. We will see you on the next deep dive.